All right, guys, let's go ahead and come back together. So hopefully got a little bit of a stretch, got a chance to do a few things. I know it's tough to kind of sit in front of the computer, so especially when we do a lot of that in our offices and things like that, or bedrooms. So take a little bit of break. We'll do that for the remainder of the class as well. But what I want to do is get us now into talking about module 41. So talking about other psychological disorders. And we're going to see the theme around these other psychological disorders is related back to anxiety. Okay, so these would be more anxiety-based disorders. And so this will be kind of the last of the disorders that we'll talk about before we'll start getting into talking about therapies for these disorders. Not only showing what the problems are and the symptoms are of these different disorders, but then how to treat them. So when we talk about different anxiety-based disorders, these are the kind of the general ones that we'll talk about. So we'll talk about generalized anxiety disorder. Okay? We won't get into phobias as much. Phobias kind of being fear of certain objects or situations. But again, that's phobias are kind of based on anxiety. So managing anxiety, anxiety related to specific, again, objects, kind of ideas, things like that. Okay. We will talk about panic disorders, especially as related to generalized anxiety disorder. We'll spend some time with obsessive-compulsive disorder, both in terms of what its symptoms are, but also kind of looking at the treatment of it. We'll talk about PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a disorder that is becoming more and more prevalent. And we can talk a little about why that's the case, but it's important to know about. We won't spend much time on dissociative identity disorder, this idea that we have kind of multiple personalities, or antisocial personality disorder, but we will spend some time with eating disorders. So giving you kind of a sense of what we're focusing on a bit more, not to say that the ones that we aren't focusing on aren't as critical, but they have a little bit kind of more of the dimensions that I think you can be understood better from the other pieces that we'll be talking about. And so to understand some of these anxiety-based disorders, we'll start first with talking about general anxiety. And so general anxiety disorder is this emotional or cognitive symptoms that individuals experience, including having worrying, anxious feelings and thoughts, kind of this free-floating anxiety. And the idea behind this is that this is someone who just feels kind of always anxious, okay? But it's not really tied to any kind of one specific thing. Okay? So it's kind of free-floating in the sense that this is experiences that people are having, but it's not something that can easily kind of go away. You can't just kind of point to something and say, oh, that's making me anxious, so let me just deal with that piece of things. So it's not something where you're just focused on anxiety. So we're kind of constantly jittery or anxious. Your cognitions are always about worrying about something. You're always kind of concerned about past interactions and how they went. And so it's this kind of, as it says, generalized, it really kind of applies to kind of every interaction individuals have. And these symptoms, or this experience, starts to result in several different types of kind of physical symptoms. So this includes autonomic arousal, trembling, sweating, fidgeting, agitation, sleep disruption. Because this individual is kind of always at a heightened state of arousal, this is what we end up seeing that person experience. And they start to experience that autonomic arousal. Again, we want that autonomic arousal when we are under threat, when there is something wrong that we need to respond to. This is a healthy response to respond when we need to get out of a dangerous situation. But we can see that these healthy responses can then go the wrong direction, a lot of these disorders, where they start to become too much. In the case of generalized anxiety disorder, now you have the case where this heightened state of arousal is always happening. And because of this, kind of tied with this heightened state of arousal, this person's always anxious. They can't kind of calm down. They can't figure out what's bothering them. And so you can kind of try to imagine being this type of person where you're going through your everyday experiences and things are constantly causing you to be anxious. You're kind of always fidgety. That causes you not to be able to focus on what's going on. It causes you not to be able to kind of calm down and deal with this overall anxiety. Now, as kind of a related concept to this anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, we see this idea of panic attacks or panic disorder. And we'll see with both panic disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, these kind of symptoms, these characteristics are true of kind of many different anxiety disorders as a whole. Okay, so they'll be less extreme in other cases, but they're still tied to the kind of this overall thinking. So as a specific kind of demonstration of these anxiety disorders, we can talk about panic disorder. And when we talk about a panic attack, we have to be clear what it is and what it isn't. So a panic attack is just not an anxiety attack. Okay, so you might have had an anxiety attack when you think that maybe you missed an assignment or you're running late for an appointment, where you get kind of anxious, you get kind of worried, you get a little bit jittery, but after just a little bit of time, you can resolve that anxiety. And maybe after you get a chance to kind of think about it for a little bit, you can calm yourself down. That's not the case for a panic attack. Okay? So a panic attack may include many minutes of intense dread or terror. Okay? So you feel like things are absolutely the worst that they can be. You're panicked. You feel like it's the absolute end of the world. Things are just awful for you. We can see it manifesting itself in even more extreme versions of what we talked about with the symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder. Now the individual might experience chest pains. They might feel a choking as their throat might close off. There's a numbness to them. They might have other frightening physical sensations, such as their heart really pounding. Maybe their limbs start to kind of feel stressed or under a lot of pain. I think the biggest thing that characterizes a panic attack is there's a huge need to escape. The person wants to get out of this situation. They want to remove themselves from the stressor. They want to feel better. They want to recover. And so I actually, as I was thinking about this lecture and I was going through Instagram yesterday, one of the people I follow, who's a blogger in Australia, actually talked about her first panic attack. And so I wanted to actually share this with you because I thought it was a great demonstration of what we were talking about here, and it was very kind of her to share this experience. So she says, when I had my first panic attack, I was convinced I was having a heart attack. An ambulance ride and 6 hours in the emergency room later, I was informed the crushing sensation in my chest, racing heart, and shallow breathing, which had woken me from my sleep, were in fact the results of an anxiety attack. Okay, so keep in mind, this happened to her when she was at rest and she was sleeping. The good news is that unlike heart attacks, there's no current cases of anxiety attacks alone killing anyone. So anxiety attacks themselves won't kill anyone. However, though, as she points out with the bad news here, she says the bad news is anxiety attacks feel, if every possible way, like you're in fact about to die. And I think that's a strong statement to what this experience is like. She says you can struggle for air, feel incapacitated with an intense sense of terror, collapse, faint, or hyperventilate. It's hard to reason with your misfiring brain at this point in time that there's nothing to worry about when your sympathetic nervous system is going to overdrive. Okay, so she's capturing this idea right there that you can't just rationalize yourself out of it. You can't just pull yourself out of that moment by saying, hey, I'm just having a panic attack. That's all consuming in terms of how your brain is functioning. She continues to say, even still, to an outsider, it looks like someone with anxiety is simply being overly dramatic or emotional. I've been told on more than one occasion to simply take a breather, calm down, or stop overacting. She says, if only it were that simple. The truth is, the more I'm pressured to snap out of it, the worse and subsequently more anxious I typically feel. And I know I'm not alone. It's estimated anxiety disorders affect 400 million people in the United States alone. Okay, and one of the things she captures here too is saying that with this panic disorder, it's also the concerns that these repeated and unexpected panic attacks start to create fear of the next panic attack as well. So I think what her snippet does, and hopefully reading through that kind of gave you a better sense of it, is it really describes it from her perspective. And she says many things that are very consistent with this idea of dread and terror. This feeling like, in fact, you're dying, but you're not going to die because panic attacks don't cause death, but they get you pretty close to that exact experience and feeling this need for escape. And oftentimes, too, as she kind of highlights a little bit, by the time you can actually seek any type of mental or say physical or mental treatment, so you get to the emergency room, a lot of time these panic attacks have gone away by then. Okay, so they happen quickly. They're not of overly long duration most times, but they can be something that you can't necessarily get the treatment that you need for right away. So questions about our generalized anxiety disorder or our panic disorders, we start to create some of the basis, kind of the foundation for understanding anxiety disorders before we start talking about obsessive-compulsive disorder. So we can continue kind of progressing forward to understanding anxiety disorders by talking about obsessive-compulsive disorder. Okay, so let's start kind of breaking down the basics of what this is. And again, you'll see with OCD that this is an anxiety-related disorder where an individual is trying to manage anxiety that they experience. And so this anxiety they experience comes from obsessions. So obsessions are intense, unwanted worries, ideas, and images that repeatedly pop up in the mind. Okay, so again, obsessions are intense, unwanted. Okay, so that's a key piece as we talk about it being dysfunctional. These are unwanted worries, ideas, and images that repeatedly pop into the mind. So the idea with obsessions is that an individual can be going through their day, and suddenly this worry or this concern will just pop up in their mind. And it might not be the least bit related to the things that they're currently doing. It might be related to something that happened quite some time ago, but the idea pops up. And these obsessions can be intense, where they really start to take over the mind's ability to process and focus on things. They start to really distract that person away. Now, to deal with these obsessions, individuals might demonstrate compulsions. So compulsion is repeatedly strong feelings of needing to carry out an action, even though it doesn't feel like it makes sense. So compulsion is a repeatedly strong feeling of needing to carry out some type of action, even though, again, that action might not make sense for especially how it's related to the obsession. So the compulsion is, hey, I need to do something. I need to react to this obsession, these worrying, this anxiety that I have in my mind. So I'm going to do some type of behavior to try to manage this. So when we think about OCD, we can think about it to an experience that we might have, but that experience kind of on turbo. So you might have an experience that you're concerned about making sure your house is closed, it's locked up. And this might be something that pops into your mind throughout the day. And if this is something that happens to you, you might be able to easily dismiss this. Okay, say, oh, I'm fine, it's not a problem. For someone with OCD, that obsession keeps coming up. And to address that kind of obsession, that worry that they might have to be concerned about this popping of their mind, they might go through a series of actions and compulsions to try to make that obsession go away, to deal with that anxiety that's caused by that obsession. Okay, so if you're worried about locking your door, you might pull on the door handle just to make sure that it's checked. Okay, not a big deal. In fact, that's very functional, make sure everything's secure. But where it becomes problematic, though, is when that compulsion starts to come up and starts to become kind of a long routine that you have to do, or starts to distract from what's going on. And this is where we start to see that obsessive-compulsive disorder becomes a disorder when it's experienced by distress. Okay, so when you're deeply frustrated with not being able to control those behaviors. Okay, so you're going about your day, you might have obsessions, you don't want to act on these obsessions, you want to stay focused on the things that you're doing. But instead, you're having to do these compulsions to try to reduce that anxiety, reduce that stress. We also can see that it becomes disordered when it's dysfunctional. So when you spend the time and mental energy on these activities, and they start to interfere with our thoughts, our behaviors, keep us from doing the things that we need to do on an everyday basis. Okay, so when we become so focused on our obsessions, they're so distracting, we start to act out these behaviors to try to make those obsessions, that anxiety with those obsessions go away. This can start to become disordered because that individual might experience distress, knowing that that's problematic behavior, things that they don't want to do. Or they might say, well, hey, it's become dysfunctional because they're spending so much time on it. And in fact, I'll show you just a little bit, a video of one with obsessive-compulsive disorder, and you'll see these obsessions, you'll see these compulsions, and you'll also see how they become disordered for her. Okay, you can see the distress that she's experiencing, it's emotionally hard on her. And you'll also see the dysfunction, where it's starting to keep her from doing the things that she needs to do. And researchers have looked at some of the different percentages of OCD behavior. So they'll look at in terms of obsessions with germs and toxins as being about 40% of people report this, something terrible happening, or desire to have some kind of symmetry or exactness. So individuals with OCD may be especially concerned about germs, getting germs on themselves, germs in their environment. We'll see with our young mom, she's concerned about getting germs on her young child. This is something that might become more prevalent as people become concerned about the coronavirus, this obsessions with germs and toxins. Individuals with OCD may be terribly afraid that something happened, that maybe they ran over someone on their way to work or on their way to school. Something that you likely would think wouldn't happen, or if it did happen, you obviously would notice. These individuals start to become concerned about this. They also want to manage things in terms of the symmetry or order that they might have, obsessed with things being in order. And to relieve these obsessions, individuals will go through compulsions. So we'll see excessive hand washing, bathing, toothbrushing, grooming are all related to dealing with that obsession with cleaning themselves, having cleaning rituals, doing things kind of over and over again. That kind of relates to the repeated rituals of kind of doing things, going in and out of a door, checking things several times, trying to make sure nothing terrible has happened. And so we ultimately see is that there's a common pattern to kind of all these compulsions of kind of rechecking. So although you're pretty sure the door is locked, you must check it again. And again, this might be a good behavior once in a while where you're just double checking to make sure you locked your door, maybe your car door. But again, this is where we start to see that extreme, where that obsession, that concern with making sure you're secure or you're safe starts to involve, all kinds of different behaviors. Okay, so you might, click the lock button on your car, okay, from your remote. Then you might put the key in and turn it. Then you might pull on the handle of the door, the driver door. Then you might pull on a passenger side handle. Those type of compulsions dealing with this potential obsession, making sure your door is locked, your car is secure, starts to take up time and energy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the video clip of the young mom who's experiencing OCD. And I want you to take note of obsessions and compulsions. So write these down so you have it when we come back together as a class. And write down where she has obsessions and where she has compulsions, kind of noting where some of these compulsions come into play in order to reduce the obsessions, anxiety that she's feeling. Okay, so give me just a moment to get our video pulled up. And again, if the video is not working correctly for you, let me know right away.
Her obsessions centre around her baby son, Jake.
When I come to stop signs, I have to look at him while I'm stationary for fear that someone's going to come up and take him, open the door. I have to start the car before I take my eyes off him. When I'm moving, I figure nobody can get to him.
Stephanie's protective maternal instincts have gone into overdrive. It's a form of OCD that sometimes afflicts new mothers.
Don't like it, don't like it, don't like it. Just doesn't like.
Okay. To set this trap, I'm going to use a video cassette, which I shall lean against the door. Then I'm going to take this pen and line it up along the green rectangle. And I'm going to point this napkin so the edge, if you follow it with your eye, matches up with the corner of my wall.
Stephanie fears that someone might kidnap Jake, even when she's at home with the doors locked and the alarm on.
I'm not sure if somebody might have gotten in the house while I wasn't here, so I'll set a trap. I will set things up at a certain angle that if they're moved, I'll know it. It's so pathetic.
For a walk?
Stephanie knows her thoughts are irrational, but they're beyond her control. Protecting Jake from every conceivable danger makes life hard.
Okay, get your stick.
When I can't take my eyes off Jake, it's literal. I stare at him. If I glance away, even like this, it's a chance for something to happen. He has to be in front of me so that I can see him the entire time, so that if somebody walks by, I know that they aren't going to bump him, spit on him, grab him, touch him, inject him with something, whatever. Take him.
Like many people with obsessive-compulsive disorder, Stephanie also has a fear of contamination. She avoids litter or spots on the pavement in case the wheels of the buggy touch something deadly. Passers-by pose a double threat. They could kidnap Jake or contaminate him.
Okay. Just need to make sure nobody was near him. Cigarette?
If I looked away, I'll have to turn my stroller around, look behind me to see if anybody was in the area, but then I worry that maybe I took my eyes off him while I was checking to see if anybody was behind us. So I'll turn back around, and then I'll turn back around the other way, and I'll just spin around in circles until I feel relatively sure that it's okay. Sometimes it's hard for me to go for a walk because I can never get home because I'm constantly having to turn around and go the other way because there's somebody coming. If somebody's walking towards me, then I get frantic.
No, please keep him on a leash.
And it's a fear of never knowing if he was contaminated. It's like I'll never know if that person who walked by touched him. And that will eat away at me.
Before Jake was born, Stephanie was diagnosed as having OCD. Her obsessional fear of contamination leads to compulsive rituals which she uses to manage her anxiety.
When I am going to interact with Jake in some way, I have to be certain my hands have been just cleaned. And they have to be scoured clean.
The urge to perform these compulsions is so strong that in this half hour, Stephanie washed her hands 22 times.
It's torturous. I wash my hands continuously. I know I try to stop myself, but it's almost like my feet begin moving for the sink, and I'm trying to tell myself not to do it, but I'm desperate and I have to.
And the washing ritual is complex and has to be performed absolutely correctly 3 times.
I have to lather up my hands completely, drawing my fingers through my other hand. The water has to be as hot as it can be. I start with my forefinger and scrape under my left thumb, and then I switch to my thumbnail and go to my forefinger, the middle finger, ring finger, and then I get to the pinky and I switch to this hand and go back and forth several times, and that just gets the first layer of contamination off because I still feel, since I scraped under my nails, that it's somewhere on me. So I have to get another pump and do it all over again. And this is really the one that I feel cleans me, because now my nails are clean and now I'm just going to scrub my hands. And then I have to do a finishing rinse. This is the part that's hard because the water's really hot, burning, but sometimes I keep my hands under there just to feel better. And then I get my towel, and I will be careful not to touch the garbage when I put this in, so I have to, and it touched my hand, so I'm back. But it dries your hands out and your hands crack, and then it gets to the point where I can't close them more than this because the knuckles will crack open and bleed.
It's always been there. It's been noticeable, but it's been manageable. We could joke about it. We could kid her about it. We could do things, to set her off. But it wasn't an issue until Jake was born, our son Jake. Since then, it's been uncontrollable.
Ready? What do you want to do with that?
Stephanie is desperate to start treatment as she realizes the real danger to her son comes from her obsessions.
I'm extremely worried about the effect this is having on Jake. I'm so desperate to take good care of him, and the OCD has a negative effect on him. On his dresser is the soap pump. He puts his hand at it and rubs his hands together. He was doing that at 1 year old, and that struck me that I need to do something, because no 1 year old should be, pretending to wash it. That was the first thing he pretended to do was wash his hands.
All right, so let's come back and take some time to kind of process that video, process the experience that we saw. So thinking about some of the basics of obsessive compulsive disorder, okay? Let's start first. What were maybe 2 or 3 obsessions that she demonstrated in the video? And again, you can just jump in, over chat. You can jump in, just kind of sharing it with your microphone. Okay, so what are some of the obsessions she demonstrated? So she definitely had an obsession with cleanliness. Okay, she was worried about germs and making sure that no germs got on her son, got on her. Okay, so I think that's one obsession she definitely had. What was the second or third obsession? Okay, so some degree you guys are already jumping to compulsions. So keep in mind, our compulsions are behavior that she's doing. What are her obsessions? What are these kind of unwanted worries that she has? Okay, these things are popping into her mind all the time as she's just trying to go through her daily interactions. All right, so we can see that we have kind of these two really clear obsessions that she has. You guys have captured both of them. One is she's very obsessed with cleanliness, okay, with making sure there's no germs. And the second is that she's concerned that her son will either be attacked or taken away from her. Okay, so there's something about, some threat to her son somehow. Okay? Now, this leads us to, well, how is she going to manage that anxiety? How does she manage the anxiety of cleanliness, making sure Jake doesn't get contaminated, making sure Jake isn't taken away from her? And you guys are hitting at some of these compulsions. Okay, so let's highlight some of the compulsions. Concerned about or compulsions of washing her hands. Okay, she has to keep moving so no one takes the baby out of the car. Okay, you see some compulsion terms that she's always washing her hands, being afraid of touching the top of the garbage bin. Okay, what are some other compulsions you saw her demonstrate, especially as they relate to these two obsessions we talked about? Because she demonstrated several different compulsions, a multitude. Okay, so what are some other behaviors that she was doing, feeling like she needed to carry out in order to kind of get past things? Okay, so I think that's one of the most distinct ones that Nick is offering, excuse me, kind of the trap that she sets up, kind of security measures. She sets it up in a very elaborate way. Even though she's locked in and the security monitor's on, you can see how she had to line things up so if those aren't aligned just perfectly, just correctly, that she would know something's wrong. Okay, what are some of the other compulsions she demonstrated? Okay, kind of reviewing the video, thinking about it. What were some of the other behaviors she did in order to kind of alleviate these obsessions she had? And again, some of these don't make very much sense at all. Okay, so another good one here, the pathway she makes, walking her child, you can see that she has to be very careful how she's going around things. She doesn't want to get the buggy wheels contaminated by going over something that's gross on the ground. She has to carefully avoid all kinds of other strangers. And let's get one other compulsion, because she had many. I think you guys did a good job identifying them. I think there's at least one or two other ones out there as well. So, I think building kind of off of Reed's comment, I think it's interesting too that, and Sophie's actually capturing this perfectly. So always looking around, turning herself around in the stroller to make sure that Jake's safe. I think that's a really clear version of that compulsion to make sure that she's safe, or make sure that Jake's safe, excuse me. She's turning the stroller around all the time. She's literally leaving the stop sign, looking the wrong direction to make sure that no one's jumped in the back seat to take Jake. And so continuing to kind of process this, you guys are doing a really nice job. So let's do our last piece here. Why would we consider her obsessions and her compulsions to be a disorder? Where are we demonstrating, where are we seeing examples where she's experiencing distress and she's demonstrating that it's dysfunctional? Okay, so our last piece in evaluating our OCD mother here, where is she experiencing distress? Where does she indicate she was distressed? Where is her behavior dysfunctional? Okay, so we can see collectively as a whole, it's interfering with her life. Okay, so let's kind of delve into that. What aspects is it interfering with? Okay, so Ryan's bringing up great. She can't go on walks. Okay, so imagine, you want to go get some fresh air. Imagine right now trying to get fresh air. We're so super important to do that. And so she can't, get home. Sometimes she goes out. She can't get home because she's so worried about Jake and avoiding things that she gets stuck. Okay? You can see too, she can't live in peace. She can't function properly. You can see it's distressing for her. You can see that she discussed her hand washing and how that's dysfunctional for her. In the case that Sophie is addressing here, that it causes her hands to crack. Okay? It's physically hurting her. In fact, individuals that wash their hands because OCD can even start to wash away their fingerprints. So it's a unique characteristic about them. So you see that washing your hands is painful. Where else do we see as being distressing and dysfunctional? You can see that her son starts to get affected by this in a negative way. Okay, so she starts to see that she's teaching her son bad habits. Okay, other ways you see as being distressing or dysfunctional. I think with what you've kind of listed out here, it really kind of captures this fact that it's distressing and dysfunctional for her because she wants to take care of Jake. She wants to be a good mother. You can see that she very much loves Jake, but you can see it's causing distress for her because she knows she's not spending the time that she needs to helping Jake develop, spending time with Jake. She knows that he's, doing things he shouldn't. She's scared that everything is harmful, so that's stressful for her. We also see too that she identifies that dysfunction. She realizes that instead of nurturing Jake, because she's washing her hands all the time, okay, she's not spending time with Jake. So imagine just in that half hour, she spent 22 minutes washing her hand, which meant at most she spent 8 minutes with Jake, who she wants to take care of. And that's where you start to see it becomes especially dysfunctional and distressing for her. She wants to address that. And what we'll see when we get into therapy is we'll come back to watching her video and learning about her, and we'll see the therapeutic techniques that are used to help her deal with these obsessions, with these compulsions. And you start to see her distress start to go down. You start to see that she becomes more functional. The dysfunctional aspects of spending all this time trying to protect Jake go away, and she spends more time with Jake. So we're going to leave it here in terms of talking about anxiety disorders. We'll pick these up again on Tuesday. I don't want to rush us through anything else here at the last little bit. If there's things I can help you with as you're working on studying, doing the module outline, the quiz, please let me know. Otherwise, make sure to take care of yourself. Spend some time outside if you can. Get away from your desk. Get away from kind of school a little bit. Get a break from things. Can be very helpful. So otherwise, take care, guys. Have a great weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday. I'll hang around a little bit in case you have any questions for me. All right, see ya.